Buenas tardes, Aratalion, good afternoon. Thank you very much for choosing to be here today. I know you've got many choices available to you, so thank you for choosing to be here. I'm hoping there's not too many people who just fell asleep during Brendan Spillan's session and are still here now. I'm going to talk about the learning pit today. I'm going to talk about when it came about. I'm going to talk about why it came about and why I think it's a useful tool for the classroom. I'm going to talk about what it is and how it could work. I'm going to try and cover all of those in the time that we've got. The slides that I use, you are very welcome to a copy of them. By all means, take photographs as well, if you want. Make sure I'm smiling when you take the photographs. But if you would like the slides, then please either get a piece of card, put your email address, leave it here, or there are some cards being passed around as well by some of my colleagues. Write your email address, and we will make sure you get the slides. Where the pit started. It started here. I'm not calling him a pit, but about 15 years ago, I heard John Edwards talking about a pit. This was the pit he was talking about. He talked about leadership and going through a pit. I was a teacher at the time. I loved that analogy of the pit. I went back to school and I worked with my students. We added 4 different points to this pit. We created the learning pit with 4 different stages. We identify the concept, we challenge those notions, we then construct answers, and then we consider the learning journey. If you'd like to know more about this, then there are books all about the learning pit, and I'll tell you more about that later. What I was particularly looking for is a way to develop inquiry, to get students to engage in inquiry. And how I would like to explain that is that inquiry very, very often begins with surface level knowledge. I worry sometimes at conferences like this that the idea of knowledge or the idea of being taught some knowledge is a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. It's a good starting point. We've got to start somewhere, and starting with the surface level knowledge is a good starting point. However, that's not enough. Now we need some thinking skills, we need some reflection time, we need to move from the surface level down into the deep understanding. And inquiry helps us to do that. To put it more simply, we're talking about starting with the facts and then developing an understanding of the concepts. And that's thinking for ourselves, and it's thinking together. And that's one of the reasons for the learning pit. It's about developing that inquiry, helping us to move from surface to deep, from facts to concepts, and moving across and back and forth between thinking for ourselves and thinking together. I also think the learning pit is about trying to develop the everything else. The everything else that might include such things as citizenship and thinking dispositions, ethics and confidence. It's about trying to develop those habits of mind, if you will, those attitudes towards learning that we've heard so much about. It was also inspired by a conference that I went to in Varna, in Bulgaria. And it was a philosophy for children conference. That's my first love, philosophy for children. I used to use it all the time with students, still do. And I went to this conference. There were 200 philosophers, all sat round, scratching their chins and wondering whether they were really there or not. You know the sort of things that philosophers do. Thankfully, the organizers said, we need to lighten the mood. We need to make it more interesting. And they brought in some teenagers. I sat with the teenagers. And I ran an inquiry using the learning pit. And the question that they chose during that session was, why sacrifice yourself for others? I thought, that's a nice question. Who would like to start? This boy put up his hand, 13-year-old. He put up his hand, he said, I'll start. It seems to me that the most important concept in that question is sacrifice. And I think people might sacrifice themselves based on either instinct, impulse, or intuition. He was 13 years old. All the philosophers sat around going, yeah, good point. And I'm thinking, what do I do here? The ideas he had picked out, instinct, impulse, and intuition. I thought, what am I going to do with this? So I said, what I'd like you to do is talk in your groups about those three ideas, decide what they all have in common with each other. And whilst they did that, I ran over to a philosopher and I said, help, what do I do? I got back to the group. I said, so then, what do you think those three things have in common? First girl put up her hand and she said, they are all names of perfumes. I was like, yes, you and me, we're on the same wavelength. That other boy, all that intellectual stuff, no, I'll leave that. I'm on the same wavelength as her. Afterwards, after this lesson, I went to the organizers and I said, you put me up to this. You did not tell me that you were getting the most talented philosophers from all around Bulgaria. And they said, all we did was invite volunteers to take part. And I said, so how come they're so good at thinking? And she said, because we teach our children how to think from the moment they come to school. And I said, well, we teach them how to think. And they said, well, that's interesting. We've visited many countries. And most of the time, we see teachers teaching students what to think and not how to think. We see when teachers, they only seem to question students if they think the students have got it wrong. And so the students take that question to mean, you've got it wrong, you need to think again. But if they've got it right, very often the teachers don't question it. So this is a way to teach children how to think. I am very much inspired by the work of Carol Dweck and her work on fixed and growth mindsets. And this is one way to develop growth mindsets. I started with that quote at the beginning. I used to really like it, but I'm not so sure about that anymore. I think it's the word happy, because is that really what we want most of all, is for our students to be happy. I'm not saying let's make them miserable, but is happy the right word? These days I'm more leaning towards an idea from Angie Hobbs that maybe flourish is a better term. We want our students to flourish. I want my own children to flourish. And that means tough as well as good. It means making it difficult as well as helping them. it means not all the time being happy. It's about that combination to help them flourish. How many of us remember that film? How many of us can drive on autopilot? How many of you drive from home to work and you're driving along, not really thinking about anything very much, and you get to work and you think, how did I get here? How many of you do that? No wonder the roads are so dangerous. We're driving on autopilot. How many of our students are on autopilot in their lessons? We ask them a question, they go through the motions, they get it done. What the learning pit is about is trying to stop them going on autopilot. And one way to do that, let's think about this. You set off from home and you drive into work on autopilot. What if I blocked that route? What if I put a big block in the way so you could no longer go that way? Now you would have to start thinking. You'd have to start thinking, okay, well, I need to go a different way. And if, as you go in a different way, I block that route. Now, some of you would think, sod it, I'm going home for a duvet day. But the idea is to get you thinking. Get us thinking more. Now, some people say, well, why do you have to block their route? Why don't you just get them to talk about what they're doing? Why don't you get them to find another route? My response to that is, you obviously teach different students to the ones I've taught. When my students had got a right answer, if I had said, very good, well done, could you think of another way to solve that problem? They would have gone, why? I've got a way that works. It would be like me knocking on your door one day and say, do you know there's 12 different ways to get from home to work? How many of you can go, really? That's very interesting. I think I might try a different route every day. And how many of you are going to say, look, get out of the way, I'm late. So that's what a key part of the learning pit is about, blocking their normal route. Here's a summary of the why for the learning pit. It's about moving from the left side across to the right side. It's about moving from these states of affairs, and I'm not saying they're all necessarily bad. I'm just saying we should be moving from that to that side if we're going to deepen inquiry, if we're going to get our students thinking more together. So let's look at the pit then. So that's the why. Let's look at the what. The learning pit. It's got 4 stages to it. And it begins with the topic. It begins with the subject matter. What are we learning about at the moment? Here are some examples of those sorts of topics that we might look at. And that's just a few out of hundreds of topics that we might look at. We identify the topic, and within the topic, we identify the concepts. So let's take that first one, tourism. Let's think about tourism for a moment. Tourism in Bilbao. What are the facts? We could get the students to look at the facts. That's the surface level. That's the starting point. Now, let's move to the concept. The concept is, of course, tourism, and we can ask that question, well, what is a tourist? How do we know what a tourist is? So, this conference began with a presentation, a keynote from David Perkins. He was here on, Monday evening. He did his keynote. For 2 minutes, I would like you to talk with the person next to you about the question. As a photo I took of David, the question is David a tourist this week? Talk to the person next to you. Is he a tourist this week? Okay, let me pause you there then, please. Consider for a moment, would you, how many skills of thinking did you use to answer that question? If I give you a list, that's not a complete list. Obviously, that's not all the skills of thinking there are. But if I show you that list, how many of those skills of thinking did you use to answer that question, is David a tourist this week? Now let me talk to you about how the pit works. We identify the key concept. That's stage one. Identify the key concept. So in this example, it's a tourist. Then we take that surface level knowledge, we've identified the concept, and then we try to get down into the pit. What we're trying to do is confuse the kids and get them down there into the pit. Let me tell you how I would do it then. So, I was with a group of students. I asked them, so what is a tourist? They said, a tourist is somebody who visits another place. This was in Australia. I come from the UK. So I said, I'm visiting another place today. Am I a tourist? And they said, no, you have to be having fun. I said, I am having fun. And one of them said to the other one, he's weird, him, isn't he? I says, come on, what's a tourist? They said, oh, a tourist is someone who spends money. I said, I spent money getting here today. They said, a tourist is somebody who takes photographs. I said, I've been taking photographs as I've walked around the school. I said, what is a tourist? I don't understand. They said, a tourist is somebody who goes on tour. And I said, but I've just been on tour around your school. And they went, oh, you've got an answer for everything. And I said, that's not my point. I'm not trying to have an answer for everything. I'm trying to find out what a tourist is. So they said, well, why don't you tell us then? And I said, but I don't know the answer. At which point one of them put up that, why are you teaching us then? I said, but how could we find out the answer? They said, well, we can ask somebody who knows. I said, yes, we could. Good luck in finding that person. What else could we do? Oh, well, we can look on the internet, or we can look in some books. I said, okay, great. I'll give you 10 minutes. Go and do a bit of research. Come back and we'll see where we go from there. The teachers who were watching that lesson said that the students were much more engaged than normal. Because normally, lessons tend to be, we're going to study tourism, go and find out what a tourist is. So off they go. They go online, they go to Wikipedia, they find the first article about tourism, they hit Command P, they walk over, the printer wasn't switched on, so they switch it on, they go back, they do it again, they go back, it wasn't working this time. They spend their time just shuffling things around, and then they say, there you go, I've done it. What this is about is saying, let's get them in the pit first. Let's get their minds wobbling first before they go do any research. And what happened was, those kids went to do their research, but they were saying things like, see, I told you someone who goes on tour is a tourist. And one of the other kids said, yes, but we could go on a tour like on a pub crawl. 12 years old, you know. We could go on a pub crawl and we wouldn't be tourists. Oh, well, and then I love the bit where one girl said, I know you are a tourist if you think you are a tourist. And her friend said, hang on a minute, I've got a baby sister. She doesn't think anything at all, really. And we've just been on holiday. And she was a tourist, but she didn't think she was a tourist. And they're like, oh. My question to you then, imagine that moment in that classroom. How many of those skills of thinking might they have had to use when we start to challenge and we start to question? How many more of those skills do they need? If I had said, what is a tourist? And they had said, a tourist is someone who visits another place. And I had said, very good, well done. How much thinking do they require for that? This is about that, when they're going on autopilot, it's about blocking their normal route to find another way. And then you block that next route to get them to think more. I was working with some 8-year-olds. I said, what are you studying at the moment? They said, odd numbers. I said, oh, that's interesting. What's an odd number? They said, an odd number cannot be divided by 2. I said, whoa, that sounds interesting. So give me an example of an odd number then. And they shouted out, 7, 3, 9, 11. I says, let's say 5. Let's say I've got 5 cakes and I'm going to share my 5 cakes with my new friend here. How many cakes will you each get? And they said, she will get 3 and you will get 2. And I said, why? And they said, because you're a gentleman. No, I'm not. I want my fair share. So they said, all right then, she'll get 2 and you'll get 2. I says, what are you going to do with the last one? They said, we'll keep it for a friend. I says, come on, what would you really do? And they turned round to apologize to the 20 teachers at the back before they leaned forward and they said, we'd cut the cakes really. I said, so you can divide 5 by 2? And they said, yes. I said, so does that mean 5 is an even number then? And they all went, yeah. All the teachers at the back going, oh, flipping hell. Weeks of work down the drain. I'm not trying to confuse them, then just leave them. I'm trying to get them to think a little bit more. That was not the end of the lesson. It was not, so you think 5 is an even number? Great, off you go. That was just the starting point to get them to think a bit more. Let me ask you this question. If you are going to run dialogue, if you're going to run a classroom discussion, what would be your ground rules for that discussion? Take a minute, talk to the person next to you. You are about to run a classroom discussion with your students. What will you tell them? These are the behaviors I expect. what would be the ground rules you would say we must follow these golden rules to make sure that this dialogue works? 1 minute talking with the person next to you. Okay, thank you very much. I suspect that most of you will have said things like respect. We must have respect for each other. We're going to listen to each other. We're going to encourage each other, and we're going to take turns. I guess that's what you might have said. However, what if these two students were in your class? They have been brought up as extreme right-wing. Do your ground rules still stand? Talk to each other for 1 minute. The ground rules you came up with, these two are in your class. Do you still ensure there is respect? Give everyone a chance to speak. Are we going to encourage them to air their views? 1 minute talking with the person next to you. Now what do you do? Okay, let me pause you there for a moment, please. Let's say the discussion is the same one as I had in Bulgaria all those years ago. And the question is, why sacrifice yourself for others? And the first child is saying, well, I think you would sacrifice yourself if you valued them. Somebody else is saying, I think you would sacrifice yourself if you liked them, if you wanted to save them. And then one of those two say, well, you'd only sacrifice yourself for white people. You wouldn't sacrifice yourself for a black person. Definitely not for a Jew. How do you respond to that? Do you give them the respect that we said we would give? We're giving them respect, or do you stop them there? How are you going to respond when they say that? Talk to the person next to you. How are you going to respond? Okay, thank you. So I assume that quite a lot of you might have said, well, we would ask other students. Does anyone else have another thing to say? But here's the thing. Those two have been brought up to make sure that they can put their views across very strongly, because their parents know that they have different views from everyone else. So, most of the kids in the class kind of go, don't know, don't really know. And then these two are speaking and they think, well, they seem very sure of themselves. And here's our dilemma. If as a teacher you question those kids and you challenge them, it might look like you think they are wrong. And you might start getting into teaching them what to think rather than how to think. And if you say, you can't say things like that in here, what are they going to think? Well, I'll say things out like that out there then. But those of you who say, well, no, but I'm going to give them that respect and I'm going to allow them to share their opinions, how many children from that class are going to go home to their parents and say, do you know what Lynx and Lamb said today? And their parents are going to say, oh yes, and what did your teacher say? Oh, the teacher said, thank you very much for those views. So how are you going to respond? You've got those two in your class. Talk with each other. Do you need to change your ground rules? 2 minutes talking with each other. Okay, let me pause you there if I may, please. So, let's go back to that list of thinking skills. When I asked you the question, what are your ground rules for dialogue? How many of those skills of thinking did you use? But when I raised the issue of Lynx and Lamb, how many more of those thinking skills did you begin to use? More importantly than that, it's not about the number of thinking skills. It's about setting up cognitive conflict. For those of you who have come across the pit, this is the absolutely crucial part of the pit. It's all about creating cognitive conflict. What I mean by that is this. Rather than have a student sat there with one idea. Lynx and Lamb's idea would be the Holocaust never happened. That would be their one idea. And the phrase goes, there's nothing so dangerous as an idea if it's the only one you've got. What this is about is saying, if they've got an idea, let's find an opposing view. Let's create cognitive conflict in each and every student's minds. Not so I disagree with you, but so that I disagree with me. I think, on the one hand, one thing, but I think something else that's the opposite, but I agree with it. An example. I work in schools. I say, how many of you think stealing is wrong? They put their hands up. Oh, stealing's wrong. That's idea number one. I said, I agree. Stealing is wrong. But how many of you think that Robin Hood was a good man? They put up their hand. Two ideas. They agree that stealing's wrong. They agree that Robin Hood was a good man. Those two ideas conflict with each other. And that's the key to this. Let's create cognitive conflict. A tourist is somebody who goes on tour. I could go on tour and not be a tourist. A tourist is someone who takes photographs. I could take photographs and not be a tourist. A tourist is somebody who travels. I could travel and not be a tourist. Or maybe I don't even have to travel to be a tourist. We're trying to get them to get used to cognitive conflict. How about this one? You see a child fighting with another child. So you say, what are you doing? And he says, he was bullying me. He was picking on me. And I say, if you are bullied, you have to come and tell the teacher. That's the school rules. Come and tell the teacher. That's idea number one. But what do we say? Yes, that's right, you must come and tell the teacher. And the boy says, yes, but my dad says I have to hit them back twice as hard. How's about that for idea number two? If you're bullied, tell the teacher. If you're bullied, hit them back twice as hard. That is cognitive conflict. But how many of us in this room would say that might be what your dad says, but you're at school now, and at school you have to follow the school rules? How many would say that? And what we are doing is saying, stop thinking for yourself and do as you're told. It's a bit of a slippery slope, that one, isn't it? On the one idea, drugs are bad for you. They're really bad, and I'm going to give you loads of proof about why drugs will mess you up. Drug dealer over here says, here, I'll give you these drugs. They don't mess you up, they free your mind. You get some great ideas that you would never get without those drugs, so come on then. Child says, hang on a minute, my teacher said drugs are really bad and they're illegal. Drug dealer says, yes, but ignore what they say. Half of them are doing drugs anyway. Come on, take some drugs, and I won't even charge you for them. What's the difference if we are keeping these ideas away? We need to help students to get used to having a conflict of opinions in their mind and learning how to deal with them, how to sort them through. Let me show you a video. This is a 4-minute video. This is with some 3.5-year-olds. And what I'm trying to do is set up cognitive conflict in their minds. Children in a kindergarten in England, and it starts with me saying, if you put this builder's hat on your head, who are you? And they said, Bob the Builder. I said, but if you take that hat off and I give you the name badge, Bob, who are you? I'm not Bob. Why? And I'm trying to create cognitive conflict. Let me show it. 4 minutes. I hope that the sound will work. But before we do that, let me grab a couple of these. Now then, if I put this on my head, it fits. What would you call me? Daniel, what would you call me if I had this on my head?
Bob the Builder.
Bob the Builder. So if Ava puts that on her head, is she now Bob the Builder?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. But if I put your name, Daniel, next to Ava, is she now Daniel?
Yeah.
She is?
Yeah.
And is that okay to call her Daniel?
Yeah.
Ava, do you like being called Daniel?
No, I like being called Ava.
But why not Daniel?
Because it's silly.
Why is it silly?
Because I only got one round.
Because what, sorry?
Don't like being round.
Why?
Because it's funny.
But okay, if I said, let's get my pen, and I wrote Bob. B-R-B. Bob, right? And then I put that in front of you. Is that okay?
No.
But if I take that away and put that on her head, what do we call her?
Bob.
Bob the Builder. So why is it okay to put that on her head and call her Bob the Builder, but not to put that name in front of her and call her Bob? But, Erin, can you tell me, is it okay to call her Bob? Is it okay to put that on her head and call her Bob the Builder? No, it's not. Daniel, you thought it was okay though, didn't you? Why? Because what? You don't know? Okay, let's think about this then. Cameron. Going to put this crown on Cameron's head. Now, just stay still because it's not a very big crown. Now, Victoria, if Cameron had that on his head, what do you think everybody would call him?
The King of Morpeth.
The King of Morpeth? Why would we call him the King of Morpeth?
Because he's got a crown on his head.
Okay, so Izzy, what's his name now? Is his name the King, or is it Cameron? What do you? The King. But why? So, okay, let me write that then. What was it?
King.
The King of. Well, we'll write King. Let's. Excuse me, Your Highness. Could you hold that a minute, please, Cameron? Perfect. Now, the King. Is it okay to call him the King now? Matilda, do you think it would be good fun all day long to call Cameron King? Don't call him Cameron, just call him King. Why not?
Because he stays there. Cameron. It's Cameron.
He's just Cameron, but when we put the crown on his head, what is he?
It's like King.
He is the King, but when we take the crown off, what is he?
Cameron.
Okay, right. Look at that. Now, when Matilda's got that on her head, just sit back a little bit. When Matilda's got that on her head, what would we call her? Daniel, what would we call Matilda when she's got that on her head?
A reindeer.
A reindeer?
Santa Claus.
Santa Claus. Erin, what would you call her?
Santa.
Santa. Izzy, what would you call her? Victoria, what would you call her?
Santa's wife.
Santa's wife?
Yeah.
So Mrs. Claus. Okay. Some people ask me, how long did those sessions with 3-year-olds last? And to be honest, they lasted until they got fed up and thought, we've had enough of this, let's go. And they'd normally go and put on another outfit and come back. Is he still asking those questions? Yes, he's still asking those questions. Let's just go back. The day after this one, Daniel, the little lad there, he walked into the kindergarten. And the staff in the kindergarten said, good morning, Daniel. He said, I'm not Daniel, I'm Santa. They said, Christmas was 2 months ago. What are you talking about? And then all the girls started swapping names with each other. which was fine for the staff who knew them, but there were 3 people there on work experience. And they were saying, I'm sure you were called Erin yesterday, but now you're saying you're called Ava. They started to play with those ideas, and that is the absolute key to this. It's about create cognitive conflict. It's not about saying, well done for having one idea, bravo. It's about saying, interesting idea, but what about that idea? How does that fit? An odd number cannot be divided by 2. Interesting idea. But if I've got 5 cakes, I can divide them by 2, can't I? This is not all the time. Imagine if you did this all the time. The kids would think, don't talk to him. He's just confused all the time. This is not every single moment. It's about trying to get a balance between helping them to understand and helping them to think through and find the problems that are there. We've got to get them thinking more. One way to do it, I love this phrase, not all of our questions answered, but all of our answers questioned. For those of you interested in what I would have done if lynx and lamb had been in my class, that's the approach I would take. I would question everything. Not just question the things that I think are wrong, I would question the things I think are right. Because I'm trying to give them chance to create an understanding for themselves. I can give them knowledge, but I can't give them understanding. They have to create understanding for themselves. Critical thinking comes from the Greek word kritikos, and that means able to make judgments. It's giving the children the opportunity to learn how to make judgments. I said I was a big fan of Carol Dweck's work. Let me show you a few of the different behaviors between fixed and growth mindsets. Here they are. Just think for a moment. The process I was using with those children in the video, which of these 2 are we most likely to be encouraging? Take a minute. Talk with each other. Is that sort of process going to help move kids more towards a growth mindset? Take a minute, talk with each other. Okay, can I pause you there then? So, as I said, this is not about leaving them in the pit. I don't want them to stay in the pit. Actually, I'm going to retract that. Sometimes I might want students to stay in the pit. If they're older students and they are starting to believe that there's always an answer for every question, then I might want to leave them in the pit for a while. But what happens is they start to construct answers. They start to help each other to climb out of the pit. They help each other with that. And there are many, many techniques that we can use to help them to construct their answers. We haven't got time to go into them all, but let me give you a very quick flash up of some of the techniques. So, we can use Venn diagrams, and they've been talked about today, where we compare the concept is pets. Well, what's the difference between a pet and an animal, farm animal? And we help them to gather all their ideas together and compare them. Or it might be that we get them to rank them in order, according to what they think is the most important and what they think is the least important. So again, it's gathering all those ideas. They think, so we started with one idea, and now we've got 10 ideas. What are we going to do with all that? Use some of the thinking skills strategies that we've picked up at this conference, for example. We might get them to consider whether it is one thing, another thing, or something that they don't really understand yet. So we are categorizing them. Or we might be comparing and contrasting. So, if you want to talk with your students about tourism, ask them, what's the difference between a tourist and a traveler? A tourist and a local. A tourist and a businesswoman, for example. Do an opinion line. The balance. So, we've got on this side, it's real, and on that side, it's not real. When I put the hat on my head and I become Bob the Builder, is that real or not real? My name, James, is that real or not real? The names that my friends call me, some of them not very nice names. Real or not real? Getting them to sift through this information. If you want to know more about these techniques, if you want to know more about the learning pit, then the first book was called Challenging Learning. It's been translated into various different languages. So if you want to know more of those techniques, take a peek at one of those. But let's go back to the pit. The students are in the pit. By that I mean they have got a sense of cognitive conflict. They've got lots of ideas going on in their mind at the same time. The pit is not just when it's difficult. It's not just giving them a difficult problem. It's about creating a sense where there's lots and lots of ideas and they have to sift through them. So after a while of being in the pit, some of them start to come out of the pit. Going back to the odd numbers idea, I was asking those 8-year-olds, so what is an odd number? And they got themselves into the pit, and they were working hard on it, and they were scratching their heads, oh, this is difficult. And then one boy put up his hand, he said, I know, it's like odd socks. And I thought he was going to talk about a green sock and a red sock, perhaps. I says, what do you mean? He says, well, my grandma says, no matter how many socks you put in the washing machine, you always get an odd number out. So I said, oh yeah, how does that work then? I said, well, when I stay at Grandma's, she gets me to help her with all the laundry. And what I have to do is I have to find 2 socks that look the same and I put them together. And I have to keep finding these socks that seem to go together and put them together. But you know what? She's right. Because there is always one left over by itself. It's like that, isn't it? That boy apparently normally said, I'm confused. I don't like maths. I don't get it. In the pit, he was thinking, oh, this is interesting. In fact, I remember one boy that I used to teach. He was always confused, and I met him long after he'd left school. And we got chatting. I says, what was school like for you, Gary? He said, I hated school. I says, oh dear. I said, why? He says, well, you know that pit that you taught us all about? I was always in that flipping pit. And I said, oh, right, okay, I'm sorry about that. So were there any lessons that you liked? He says, oh, I love those learning pit lessons. And I said, you've just said you didn't like it, school, because of the learning pit. And he said, no, there was a difference. In most of the lessons, I was the only one in the pit. When we did the learning pit, everybody was in the pit with me. And I used to say to them, welcome to my world. Let me show you round. And you know what? Gary left with no qualifications at all, and he's got 4 businesses, all of which are very successful. Because I think he might have learnt determination and resilience and never giving up. Welcome to my world, he says. So, they're in the pit, and then some of them come out of the pit. And when you've been struggling with something really hard and then you come out of the pit, what does that feel like? Feels great, doesn't it? That's the eureka moment. I first presented this model at the thinking conference in Norrköping. The 2 hosts are sat bang in the middle there. And I said, and that's the eureka moment. And there's this woman on the front row jumped up. She says, I've just got married. And I'm thinking, I'm really happy for you. Thank you. But would you please sit down? She says, I've just got married to a Greek man. And I'm thinking, we've got Shirley Valentine in the audience. She says, I've just got married to a Greek man, and so I'm learning Greek. And eureka means I found it. I thought to myself, I bet you have. But I didn't say it because I don't know whether the Swedes get innuendo or not. But I found it. It doesn't mean my teacher gave me the answer. It means I got it myself. And when they get that sense of eureka, what do they want to do with it? Share it. How many of you are parents? You pick up your children from school. You say, what did you do at school today? And they say, exactly, nothing. Try shutting them up if they've had the eureka moment. They will be, and when they come back to school the next day, what will they want? More of the same. They will want that eureka moment again. Here is the key to the learning pit. Do you get that sense of eureka if you haven't first struggled? If I had said, what is a tourist? And they had said, a tourist is someone who visits another place. And I had said, very good, well done. Is that the sense of eureka? Of course not. We have to help them to struggle, to get the opportunity to hit that superb elation, that superb feeling of, I found it. This has become a metaphor that lots and lots of schools are using. And I'm absolutely thrilled that there's pictures popping up on the internet all over the place of kids who have been drawing their own learning pits and sharing them with each other. I really, really feel sorry for the kids who have this teacher, but they've got lots of different versions of it. If you want to know more about the pit, then take a look. There's different ways you can do it. Have a look at that website. I'm trying to collect together all of the articles and the examples and the photographs of the pit there. And about a month ago, we released an animated version of the pit where I'm trying to explain the key points on that. And you can find that on that page there, or you can find it by searching on Vimeo or YouTube, and it's there. Let me finish, if I may, with one small but perhaps significant point. I do get frustrated at times when teachers say, that's lovely, I'd love to be able to do that, but I can't. I'm in a school where we've got this big curriculum where you just have to keep teaching them all the time. I don't have time for that pit. Well, do you remember when you were a teenager and in school you went from one teacher to another, to another, to another? Is there anybody in this room who did not know which teachers you could have a laugh and a joke with, and which teachers you suspected had never laughed in their whole lives? Which teachers had high expectations, which had low? Was there anybody in this room who didn't know which teachers were which? It's the same today. Go back. Robin Williams, who's made many of us laugh over the years. My final point is, we set the culture of our classrooms. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much.